Good evening. Yes, everyone can hear me, right? Loud and clear. Welcome to the inaugural Gaudino debate. I'm Barbara Bradley Hagerty, class of '81, and I'm teaching a winter study class here this January, which is why I'm here. Some of you might not know who Robert Gaudino was. In the early 1970s, Professor Gaudino was a political science professor who proposed something really radical. He wanted to send Williams students to live with black families in South Georgia or auto workers in Detroit as part of a program called Williams at Home. He wanted students to experience uncomfortable learning. It was unorthodox, but Gaudino was so respected by the faculty that they agreed to approve the program without any discussion. No debate. Now, Gaudino balked at that. He said if they wouldn't debate it, he was going to withdraw the proposal because, as he put it, silence is suspect. At the core of Gaudino's philosophy, and that of the Gaudino Fund, which kind of continues this tradition of uncomfortable learning, is debate. Gaudino thought that the best way to learn is to confront differences and learn through contrasts, whether that's between ourselves and others or between the values of public institutions and those of private homes. So tonight we're going to honor that tradition with the Gaudino debate. And this debate is actually an offshoot of one that roiled the campus last spring when Jiz Lee was invited to perform at Williams. Now, as you recall, some students argued that the performance challenged stereotypes and opened a dialogue about sex, and they argued it was perfectly in line with the college's mission. Others, including some alums and students, said the performance sullied the college's reputation. Now, we're not going to re-debate that debate. Rather, what we're going to do is look at the larger questions. Who owns the Williams brand? Who decides that Jiz Lee can come to campus and perhaps appropriate the Williams name? Or who decides that Williams students must fulfill an Exploring Diversity Initiative requirement? And who should make those decisions? So the formal motion for tonight's debate is, be it resolved that Williams students own the Williams brand. In favor of the motion are Professor Darel Paul and Senior Jack Noelke. Against the motion are Professor James McAllister and Andy Quinn. And before we go to opening statements, we want to get a kind of a preview, a pre-debate vote. So how many believe that how many people here believe that students own the Williams brand? Okay, you want to help me count here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. It's a small group, okay. 8. Okay, and so just so we know, how many are against that? Who say the students do not own the brand? 1, 2. You have to vote. 3, 4. Did everyone vote? Everyone voted? Okay. All right. 8 to 4. All right. Someone has tough work to do. All right.
Not at all.
For their opening statements, each person gets 4 minutes. We're going to hear from Professor Paul first, and then Professor McAllister, and then Mr. Noelke and Mr. Quinn. And
it's going to be the students first.
It is?
I think we just.
Oh, okay. Then we're going to hear the students first,
Yep.
the for, and then the against, and then the professors for and against.
Like you said, students own the brand, so they should go.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. And I will give you a 30-second warning.
Okay. Can everyone hear me, or is it? Okay. So should I start? Or?
Just 1 second, please.
Okay.
You may begin.
Think back to that time when you first arrived on campus, when you were a little bit nervous about starting college. And then try to think of one person who gave you the strongest impression of what you thought life at Williams would be like. Maybe it was one of the EAF movers who approached your mom's car and helped you carry your belongings into the dorm room. Perhaps it was a sophomore student who bravely led your wolf group into the wilderness and made sure that you got back to campus in one piece. Or was it your junior advisors who gathered your entry in a circle and set your expectations for the next 4 years? In any case, your first impression of Williams College was shaped by students. Professor Paul and I are here to contend that students own the Williams brand. The brand encompasses the ideals and achievements of the college, as well as the school's reputation in the wider world. In saying that students, in particular, own the brand, we argue first that students have the primary responsibility for shaping activities on campus, and second, that students have the greatest ability to influence perceptions about the college. Williams College has a remarkable degree of student ownership that truly sets it apart from other institutions. Our students not only enjoy extraordinary leadership opportunities, and self-determination is one of the defining values of the institution for the student body. Our school operates under an honor code that was written and approved by students, and students alone, not administrators, are responsible for voting on academic violations. The student representatives of the Finance Committee and the Minority Coalition control more than $450,000 in funding that goes to over 130 student groups on campus, almost all of which are led exclusively by students. Many of our most essential governing bodies, like the Committee for Undergraduate Life or Institutional Diversity, depend heavily on the ideas and the feedback from student members who are appointed by the student-elected representatives of College Council. And there is not a single other college in America that trusts 52 juniors to live with first-year students, to mentor them through their personal hardships, and to help them discover their roles in this community. Our junior advisors have an unparalleled impact on every first-year student. And yes, students, not administrators, conduct every single step of the junior advisor process, the JA selection process. The incredible sovereignty that Williams students hold not only gives us influence on campus, but it also gives us the power to constantly redefine the Williams brand. When I was a senior in high school, Williams seemed vastly different to me from a lot of other elite institutions. When my guidance counselor sat down with me and we talked about Williams, he didn't harp on the traditions or the historical reputations that define so many schools in the Ivy League and in other places. Instead, he talked about Williams through the frame of its students. Students who had a passion for academics, who pursued excellence in and out of the classroom and played an indispensable role in leading the community. The Williams brand doesn't depend that heavily on tradition. It depends on what current students believe and achieve. The administration responds directly to what students demand, from our recent additions of a queer life coordinator or a Muslim chaplain, or even greater offerings in identity studies. And finally, students not only define the political values of the college, they interpret them for the wider world. Most of the information available about our campus is filtered through The Record, which is an entirely student-run newspaper, and in fact, organized this debate. Indeed, if the goal of the college is to serve its students, then Williams is truly exceptional. Students drive its achievements, determine its ideals, and ultimately define its reputation. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Opening statement is going to try and convince you of 2 points here. First is that just as an empirical and logical matter, we students do not own the Williams brand. Factually, we just don't. And the second point is that that's fine because as a philosophical matter, we should not want to anyway. So first, Williams students do not own the brand as a matter of fact and of logic. First of all, it's important to state now that the mere capacity to damage or improve something does not constitute ownership. That's not what it means to own something. If students behaved really badly in a sensational way on campus and there were riots or something, obviously we'd be in the newspapers and our reputation would diminish. So we have some impact on the brand's upkeep, but a vandal can damage a corner store and drive away business. Doesn't imply that he owns that store. Or a thoughtful citizen can take it upon herself to help out an elderly neighbor with yard work. Just through improving that property, she doesn't come to own her neighbor's lawn. It's not ownership. And second, current students are at most very part-time missionaries for the college brand. Again, this is just a very common sense matter of hours in the day. When employers speak fondly of the professionalism and the intellect that Williams students and graduates display, we hear about this a lot. The Williams brand is kind of out there in the world of employment and in the business world. But of course, they're thinking about alumni with whom they've come into contact, in the professional realm or in the social realm, more than they're thinking of whatever handful of current students that person has happened to meet during visits to campus perhaps or summer internships. So the Williams brand is based on students, but it's based on what students go on to do and to be after we depart the Purple Valley, not what we do in our fleeting moments here. And similarly, the college administration includes folks whose full-time jobs are tending to the brand. They maintain the great aspects of Williams and tweak its shortcomings. Except in a handful of extremely involved student leaders here, most of us spend at most a few minutes each day sort of reflecting on the institution and thinking about Williams. And even for our college council presidents and other very involved students, it's hardly a 9-to-5 daily job. So just as a matter of fact, I think Williams students, we don't own the brand. We're not in sole control of this place. But more importantly, we shouldn't want to anyway, and so that's nothing to be concerned about. And I say that because this point might be a little unsettling for students. Our generation is famous for sort of loving to put our stamp on everything we come into contact with. We carefully cultivate Twitter feeds and select what bumper stickers to put on our Nalgene water bottles. We think that countless strangers want to read everything about our lives and that they want to do so while looking at faux vintage photographs of the oatmeal that we just prepared. So to admit that we're not the sole owners of this incredible Williams institution requires a little more humility than comes naturally to millennials like us. But philosophy and common sense tell us that there's more to flourishing and developing as humans than this modern obsession with asserting individual ownership over every aspect of our lives. Sometimes we do best not by seizing control, but by surrendering it, entrusting ourselves to great institutions not of our own design, our pride in families, in cultures, and in the moral precepts that we hand down across generations. Sometimes it really is about diving humbly into oceans of wisdom that are older and more voluminous than anything we could have accumulated on our own. Williams is exactly this kind of ocean. Russell Kirk wrote that a society is an intricate continuity of lives past and present, not a mere succession of humans. The same goes for Williams. Being a student at this incredible place is about accepting, with gratitude and humility, our small link that we represent in this incredible chain of students and faculty past and present that stretches deep into the years past and will proceed inexorably into the future. Not about arrogantly claiming that we own a brand that we simply do not. Thank you.
I think Andy's done us a good service by differentiating an empirical question from what we might call a normative question. I'll spend most of my time these next 4 minutes talking about the empirical content, but certainly the normative question of whether Williams students should or should not own the brand is a very important one, and hopefully I'll broach it briefly at the end, and then we can spend more time throughout the next 45 minutes or so discussing that. Some of you are old enough to remember the 1992 presidential debate and the vice presidential debate. Probably very few of you saw it, but one of the participants was a John Stockdale, who was the running mate of Ross Perot that year. And he famously began his debate with the words, "Who am I?" and most importantly, "Why am I here?" And in a sense, I feel a bit like that. Why am I, a faculty member, sitting at this table defending the claim that I, in fact, don't own the Williams brand? It is, in fact, the students instead. Well, I think there's a need to dig a bit into what the content of the Williams brand is. And while I think it's helpful that Andy has demonstrated or pointed out to us an interest in focusing on the empirical content, I still don't think we have a lot of great sense of what that content is. Certainly, the Williams brand is something about a spatial location, as Thoreau discussed, at the base of a mountain that sort of none of us can manipulate. That is something given by the history of this institution. There's something about a social location. Still, despite the college's efforts to become more global, it's very much an institution of the Northeast and particular kinds of placements in American society in particular. There is a history that all of us are brought into, the terrible theft of our library back in the evil days of the early 19th century or the end of fraternities in the 60s, etc. But I think what happens at the school in the now is empirically really what affects the brand, that is the image and the reputation of the institution outside of the purple bubble the most. There's an old joke about what your car, the car that you drive, says about yourself. And the joke goes something like, people who drive Cadillacs think that their car says about them, I'm rich. When in fact, it really says, that is what everybody else thinks about them, it says, you're old. So it's not so much that the person driving the Cadillac can manage the brand. What really matters is what people out there think about what that brand of car, or what that brand of school, if you will, says. If one goes to the way that the college presents itself to the wider world, for example, the admissions webpage that is up right now, this very moment, under the heading Why Williams, the college presents itself in this way. This is a quote from the webpage. Students come to Williams to both join and lead, to be part of a supportive community, and to move it ever forward. The diverse, dynamic community they compose is our most defining characteristic. Or later on in the mission and purposes statement that the Board of Trustees passed in 2007, it says, we are committed to our central endeavor of academic excellence in a community of learning that comprises students, faculty, and staff, and draws on the engagement of alumni and parents. Everyone is brought into the list, but I would submit that the way that one tells whether academic excellence is occurring or not at Williams is primarily by the achievements of current students. For example, if I can look at two well-known and of course highly respected, since they put Williams College at #1 all the time, U.S. News and Forbes ranking systems, if one looks at their methodology, it is almost solely focused on the accomplishments of current students. Since I'm a faculty member, I can point out that the U.S. News methodology, about 7% of the ranking has something to do with the characteristics of the faculty. In the Forbes methodology, 0% is determined by the characteristics of the faculty. Alumni certainly contribute part of these methodologies, but overwhelmingly it is determined by the accomplishments, the characteristics of current students.
Yes. I'd like to begin by saying thank you very much for everyone who organized this, and thank you, Barbara, for moderating it, and particularly thanks for the Gaudino Fund for all the wonderful things they do. And obviously I want to thank Andy for really doing a tremendous job, and unfortunately not leaving me with the best points to make since he already made them. Now, I want to say that Jack and Darel have made a very good case for their side, but unfortunately the position they have to defend is inherently quite weak, and I would argue indefensible. No single constituency can possibly own the Williams brand. Jack's statement in the Williams record today effectively concedes the substance of the overall argument when he suggests that the current Williams students have a primary responsibility and a vital part in shaping the Williams brand. Even if Jack were accurate in this assessment, which we don't believe he is, his own argument suggests that there are other legitimate owners of the Williams brand, which is certainly the case. I'll just give two examples just from people. I'm looking at two of my favorite Daves in Williamstown, Dave Dewey and Dave Schufeld. Dave works in development. Dave's a great alumni here all the time. These are people who sell Williams and craft the image as much, I would argue, as any student or faculty member does. Ownership or stewardship of the Williams brand is truly a shared partnership among current students, faculty, staff, the Board of Trustees, and the alumni of the college. And I think since everyone associated with the college is a stakeholder, to claim that one single constituency owns the Williams brand, well, I don't want to say it's offensive to faculty members or development officers or alumni, but I'll let other people draw that conclusion if they want to. Now, I have to confess right from the start, I dislike the idea of talking about Williams College or any educational institution in terms of a brand, as if we were selling a product no different than a computer or a sneaker. Williams College does not exist to make a profit, and we have no interest in manipulating anyone into buying our product, unlike a computer or a sneaker company. In fact, no business could survive on our business model, since it costs a lot more to educate our students than we take in tuition. And this leads to a basic point. What Williams is and what the greatness of Williams is really is the accumulation of 200 years of history and alumni support and everything else. It would be arrogant of faculty, administration, or students to claim that the greatness of Williams really starts with them. There's one other really important point, too, that I think is related to this whole question of brands. And I heard reference to the event last spring that sort of sparked this overall debate. And I think it's really something that's important to understand, which is the Williams brand is not controlled by a single constituency or wizard. Our brand sort of emerges out of the anarchy of what faculty do independently, what students do. It's not something that is tightly controlled or managed, and it shouldn't be, and I think that's ultimately a good thing. However, if we are going to use the language of brands, I think Jack and Darel are quite wrong in arguing that our appeal to prospective students in the outside world is any different than the appeal of a Harvard, Princeton, or Yale. Jack argues that our appeal is based on more recent developments and accomplishments. How recent, he does not say, rather than on historical tradition. However, like all of those eminent institutions, we are what he calls a historicized brand as well. Jack asked you to think about the first person you met at Williams, and actually, I think the better question is, how did you wind up coming to visit Williams in the first place? And that's history, not the people you meet here. I'm running out of time, so I'd just like to conclude one basic point. I think there is a big issue at stake in this question of who owns the Williams brand. Our opponent suggests that a Williams where current students are acknowledged to own the brand is a better and more progressive Williams than one in which faculty, administrators, students, and alumni are acknowledged to own the brand. Needless to say, we disagree with this view. And it is also worth pointing out that this view is not exactly progressive, since it excludes important constituencies from feeling that they are equal partners in the success of Williams. Thank you.
Oh, okay. Actually, I don't come up here. I let each side have 2 minutes for a rebuttal.
Well, Professor McAllister completed the task of any great orator, which is to define and interpret the resolution so ridiculously that your opponent can't possibly have any grounds to stand on. There's no point in even having a debate about whether students have total hegemony over owning the Williams brand. That's simply, no one actually believes that alumni and administrators and current faculty have no influence and that it's a completely student-run college. But there is an important question here in asking, do students own the brand? Because the question is, where does authority ultimately reside? And where do the values of the institution ultimately reside? For instance, Andy brought up that, you just interpret what Williams is from the alumni, but for instance, in 1969, when we first let women into the college, did people have to wait until the alumni base had an equal number of men and women to call us a gender-diverse college? No, we became a gender-diverse college once the campus was that way. Our mission statement defines us in a very sort of libertarian way. It describes a changing world, and it vaguely talks about, instilling academic values and making us effective people. But there's not this tradition that Andy set up that's, the college is trying to maintain and that these students are just stepping on it like vandals tearing it apart. No, our actual brand as defined in our mission statement is that it is constantly being updated and adapted to the world based on what current students are doing. And you guys even, brought up the Jiz Lee example, which is a perfect example of a time when, okay, no, everyone had different opinions. No one party owned, had hegemony over the brand in that instance. People debated it, but ultimately there were several alumni, some prominent alumni, trying to shut down the event, and ultimately it was the student demand for the event that allowed it to be put on. And so I would say, in that sense, students do own the Williams brand.
Well, I would just say one thing in response. I was quoting a very wise senior history major when I made the argument that some students write things such as, indeed, students, not alumni, faculty, or administrators, own the Williams brand. So I was not making an argument ridiculous. It was an argument that was indeed made ridiculous.
I have a few points to add to that. Jack, my mother was actually in the first class of women who came to Williams as freshmen and then went on to graduate. There were transfer students of women who graduated earlier. And I can tell you based on the stories of the kind of misogyny and the sort of privileged good old boy club atmosphere that those early years of women had to confront, that she and her female classmates did not come here because the current group of students was this warm, receptive, progressive group. She actually came here because she trusted that the Williams values, and remained here because she trusted that the Williams values transcended the people who happened to be on campus at a time, and that the institution's values would win out over their prejudices. Exactly our point. Professor Paul made an analogy that it's not the driver of a car, it's the wider world that forms impressions about like an automobile purchase. And it was puzzling to me that he made that point, because it's a great argument that faculty and administration don't own Williams, but neither do the students. By that logic, it's just kind of everyone who has an opinion about Williams in the world. Fine, that speaks to our point as well. But if you're going to look inside the car and try to determine relative ownership, as Jack seems to want us to do, surely the owner of the car who picked it out and is responsible for maintaining it has more control than passengers in the back seat who are along for the ride and occasionally offer advice on which turn to take. Those are the students. We can make Williams a great experience while we're here. We can make it a bad experience. But we don't steer the car, and we certainly didn't purchase it, nor decide when to change its oil.
Okay, now we have time for questions, not much time. And as moderator, while you all think up your questions, we'll take a couple from the floor. I'm going to go ahead and have the privilege of asking the first one, and then we're going to open it up to debate. Each side, open it up to the group. Each side, again, has 2 minutes to respond. And so my question is, who gets to decide what's beyond the pale? For example, say a student group wanted to invite a white supremacist to speak here. Can a group of students prevail over the objections of the faculty, of the alum, or other students? Or is there an emergency brake, and who pulls it?
I'd be happy to take that, and maybe Jack might have something to say as well. I mean, I think what's beyond the pale, I would say that that's not, Barbara, in my opinion, a very good example, because I think that's obviously beyond the pale at Williams. I think a better test would be the kinds of things that are going on right now at places like Harvard and the University of Toronto. Student sex clubs. Would a student sex club be beyond the pale at Williams? I don't know what the answer to that question is, but I think it plays to the comment that Jack gave earlier, that there is a, I don't know if libertarian ethos is quite the right word, but I think it's useful at least for the terms of our debate. As long as it is a practice that is not, quote, hurting others, unquote, as long as it's not a practice involving hate, I think that the traditions, if you will, of Williams would suggest that that is not beyond the pale. We haven't reached that test yet, but it may come sooner or later.
I would just say quickly that I think, of course, student input is important in deciding what sorts of events are within or outside the bounds of what is acceptable to the Williams community. And Jack mentioned earlier that students were able to override alumni objections to the Jizz Lee event last year. But again, just on a very practical level, use your common sense. Who owns these buildings? If the administration says, students, you may not hold this event, we could be arrested for trespassing and we wouldn't hold the event. So just very pragmatically, if student demand is effective, it's because the administration chooses to listen to the student demand and to let that shape their decisions. Students don't own anything.
Questions? Someone must, there we go.
How do both sides view the fact that, to my understanding, Dave maybe could correct me here if I'm wrong, but when the trustees meet, you can't just walk in, sit down, and listen to the trustees meeting. And I do know for a fact that the minutes are sealed for 50 years. So how does that factor into both perspectives as to who owns the college brand?
Go ahead.
Well, certainly the students don't have certain powers that the trustees have, but I would point out that there is a student representative nominated by elected students who actually sits with the trustees when they're making certain financial decisions that gets reappointed every year. And I would also point out that the trustees have been the primary authors of the college statement of missions and purposes, which is very deliberate about avoiding any statement of a stark tradition and very much opening up the college to different values, or even some administrators here would say the mutability of values, that each current class, to adapt themselves to a changing world, needs to bring their own ideals to the school and constantly redefine it or remold how it's defined.
Just briefly, I would say in terms of brand, whether it's a good term or not, we're saddled with it in this debate. I think the brand Coca-Cola is affected almost not at all by who are its vice presidents, what's its corporate address. What matters a lot more is how the consumers think of that. And so I think it's important for us to differentiate between the brand, which is something about image and reputation, versus the sort of inner workings of the institution. Clearly, the inner workings of the institution are not owned and controlled by the students, but at least from our perspective, that's not what we're here debating. We're debating the image and reputation instead.
Well, I would say, Dave, real quick, if we're talking a sort of governance perspective, I think the Board of Trustees do ultimately own the college in the sense of they're chosen by the alumni and they appoint the president. When I received tenure at Williams College, I don't have tenure until it's approved by the Board of Trustees. So I clearly put them in that sort of role. The one question, though, that I want to keep on coming back to is we're now talking about how Williams is perceived by others. And again, we have to come back to this question of why do people come to Williams College? And I don't think that students come to Williams College solely on the basis of students. Also, I don't think students totally make that decision on their own, too. There are also parents involved in everything else. And I think the reason why Williams is great is because people have a recognition that Williams is great on all levels, faculty, students, alumni, and administration. And I think that's an important question. Now, the other thing that I want to get back to, and it's a point that Jack is, I hope we have a better discussion about it. It's the idea that students are determining the new values of the college. And this is something that I don't believe that all change comes from below. If you ask why are there not fraternities at Williams or why are there women at Williams, a lot of that has to do with Jack Sawyer, not sort of pressure from below. And from a board of trustees that supported him on this. And the only point I'm making, and Jack, I think, sometimes assumes that, well, of course we acknowledge this. I think it comes back to a bigger point. Many of the developments that Jack cites as sort of examples of students owning the brand, things like the Director's Cup. Well, I think Harry Sheehy and all the support that alumni have given to athletics over the years plays a role here. Talking about the development of new programs, I think Morty Shapiro and other people, administrators had a big to-do about this and not just sort of students. And there is the other point that Andy brought up, which is students can demand, but ultimately it's an administration that has to provide it.
If I can add one thing quickly. So Jack brought up the statement of missions and purposes, and I guess we're both sort of good, well-trained liberal arts students, because I also went right to the primary source text when I was preparing for this. And first of all, what that document references a lot is community. And I took that to not only mean students run the show, but students and faculty and alumni and the other ways that the word Williams community, the phrase Williams community rather, is defined across the college's official documents. And second, though the statement of missions and purposes obviously leaves room for students to involve and shape and influence, it's signed and approved by the Board of Trustees. The students cannot write their own statement of missions and purposes and kind of ratify it in Paresky overnight. So again, if the administration and the trustees and everyone who ratified that left room for students, great. That's what makes us great. We're not denying that student feedback and involvement is important. But again, it's the Board of Trustees creates that context, owns the big picture, and students' involvement is an integral but subsidiary part of that.
Someone else have a question? please? Okay, let's see. What else? If the students control the Williams brand, then everyone in this room is going to be out of luck in no more than 4 years. You'll be alums. I'm just curious, is that an argument to say that the students don't completely control the brand? I mean, will you want to control the brand? Or is it an argument to say that you just hope that these students are well taught and while they're here, and that they do a responsible job of keeping this brand and this image good?
I would reiterate that saying students own the brand, especially as I initially defined the resolution, does not mean that you have no influence as an alumni. What it does mean is that when you're contributing money to the school or commenting on an issue of the school, ultimately the influence does reside with the student body and the current ideals of the student body. Here's a good example. When you donate money here, you can't just go in and say, I want to buy a $5 million football field. Until very recently, you could only make general donations, and then that money would be rearranged, by the administration, has a part, but ultimately they exist to serve the students, and I think the examples I brought up in my speech that weren't addressed are good examples of the administration constantly making new administrators or whatever else needs to be done to suit student needs. You know, when you donate as an alumni, now it's changed a little bit. You do get to, you have some control. You put it into a bucket of athletics or top priorities or whatever it is, but still, ultimately, you know, you respect the values of the institution. You want to make your contribution, but you don't have as big of a say as the present students do in determining the direction of the school.
I think also very briefly, maybe this is because I'm a political scientist and I think about things like power and interest a lot. Certainly a lot of what motivates alums to give money to the institution is because they support the values of the institution, but I have to believe that some of the reason too is to support the value of the brand, because alums are out in the world deriving some kind of benefit from the Williams brand, which is, from our position, determined primarily by what's going on the campus today, the qualities of the students today, particularly the academic performance, the honors won, whether it's in athletics or in academics, by the students of today.
So again, I was a little puzzled by Jack's comment, because he started making this great point and I completely agreed with it, and then I think he sort of jumped off the train before taking it to its completely logical conclusion. So he was saying that alumni can't earmark their donations, right? You can't build a $5 million football field if you just want to walk in and do so. But then he said, and since alumni don't, well, students do. But of course that's not the only answer. Students can't earmark alumni's donations either. We're not there in the comptroller's office raffling through things and deciding what accounts get what amounts. Again, those are careful administrators and the Board of Trustees with input from faculty, alumni, and students. So the whole financial control thing, I think, speaks particularly to our side, and I was just surprised to hear you bring that up.
Okay. Should I get on cam? Okay, we are about out of time, so what we're going to do is wrap up with concluding remarks. Each person has 2 minutes, and we're going to switch the order. We'll do the against side first, and then we'll do the for side, and you decide who goes first.
Yeah, I'd just like to conclude by thanking everyone for coming here. And I particularly want to thank Jack, who's borne a lot of the brunt of our criticism. And I do want to say he's made some really tremendous arguments. I think he's taken a weak argument and made me think about it a little more than I wanted to. So I did want to pay my appreciation to that. Now, I think, as often happens in debates, we're often redefining what's going on. And I would just like to leave you with a simple point. The question of who owns the Williams brand is not something that can be reasonably claimed by any single group. And I'll go even further and actually maybe lose some support for my argument. I actually think students are the least, current students are the least important part of that. If I had to rank who is responsible for the Williams brand, alumni, faculty, and administration in any order that people want to choose. Wisdom and knowledge comes from experience. I think current students, their role, I guess maybe this is the optimistic side, I think Jack will have more say in the Williams brand 20 years from now than he has now. Thank you.
Since I did not begin by thanking the Gaudino board, I will do so now. And thank you to Anouk for inviting me to represent this side of this debate. I guess the best that I can do to sum up, from my perspective at least, the pro argument, is by pointing out what I continue to see as a fundamental difference between understanding a brand and understanding the inner workings of an institution. I think there's no doubt, and neither Jack nor I are trying to defend the claim, that the inner workings of the institution are determined by students. It's a nonsensical claim, and I think the other side has demonstrated that quite well. But that's not what we're here to do. We're not trying to defend that claim. What we're trying to defend is the claim that the reputation of the institution to the outside world, the brand of Williams College, is, however, owned, that's the language we've been given at least, by students. It's a sort of a looking from the outside in versus looking from the inside in or the inside out. Whether it's discussions that Andy, I think, has demonstrated quite nicely, or some of the questions about the role and power of the trustees or the administration, all of these are true, obviously so. But I would argue those aren't parts of the brand. What are parts of the brand are the images, the understandings, the meanings that the institution has to the outside world primarily, but also to members of the community. And I think those are, in an empirical sense, demonstrated or given by the students. Whether this should be the case or not, and James, in the opening comments, talked about whether this is a better and more progressive vision. That's certainly, at least from my perspective, not what I'm here to argue. In fact, I'm arguing that I'm not part of determining the brand. But that's not, again, what we're here to do either, at least I am not, to say that this is a better and more progressive vision. I'm simply trying to say that this is the facts. This is the way that the brand is determined. Whether it is good or not is something that the community as a whole should discuss, and I think through forums like this is discussing.
You all kept to time. In fact, we're done a little bit early. Thank you so much for doing
I'm
this.
sorry, I haven't done the closing.
Oh, does each
Were we
one?
gonna do
Each one gets, forgive me?
Well,
Okay.
I'm fine, Jack.
No, 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 Ja- no, 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 no.
We're really fine.
No, no. Jack, you of all people should want to go because you've got
Well,
you've got the
I
brunt
thought
of this.
Professor Paul ended so eloquently that I wanted to leave it on that
Right,
note. But,
sorry. So is everyone happy?
Well, we should end by thanking you most of all, Barbara.
Thanking me for cutting it short. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry? Oh, the other vote. We have to do another vote. Okay, sorry about that. Let's vote. We knew, the first vote was, I think it was 8-4, even though there are like 20 people in the room. So what is the vote now? How many people are for the proposition that students own the Williams brand? Okay. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, 7, 4. Okay, and how about against? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. We have mysteriously grown. It was a 4 to 7 initially, right? I mean, 4 to 8 initially.
8 to 4.
It was 8 to 4. Oh my goodness. Okay, how many people changed their minds? 1, 2, 3. The numbers are not adding up. 4. Well, some people, the people who were against, did a very good job of persuading a number of people to change their votes, so congratulations.
Could we ask someone in the audience why they did change their
Yeah.
mind? Beyond the persuasive brilliance of the
Professor
audience,
McAllister.
what changed in your thinking about this question?
I think your emphasis on the definition of brand and how and really being very specific about the practical dimension that leadership rests in many voices, but in order to have continuity of institution, the student in that larger picture holds a short-lived role.
I don't know if you could even hear that on mic, but could you hear it? Yeah. Okay, good. Anyone else want to comment why they changed their vote or why they stuck to it? What was the most persuasive argument? Okay, well, the crowd has spoken. Thank you very much.